be recording this session, and what I will do is I will put this session later on the SeNSS website for you to review, revisit, should you wish to during the application process. I've got a set of slides that I would like to share with you. Again, the slides will be available on the website, and what is going to happen is I'm happy to take questions as we go along. There are two ways you can ask questions during this seminar. One is to put your questions under the chat, and I will be picking them up as we will go along, or raise your hands and ask questions using the mic and your camera. So more than happy, I've got my participants list in front of me, and I will be monitoring that throughout the session to ensure that if anybody has any imminent questions, I'm happy to take them as we go along. You might see me occasionally looking at my side. It's because I've got a second monitor there with the chat function and the participants function, that, as I said, I'm monitoring in order to allow for questions. So welcome again to this session. As I said already, I'm Fragiskos Filipeos. I'm the Deputy Director for the Southeast Network for Social Sciences. My predominant responsibility within SeNSS is to look after the training of our doctoral students. I don't directly supervise anyone. You're all gonna have your own supervisory teams looking after you. But what I do within the consortium of those 10 universities is I look after the training and the employability aspects of our funded students. And I try to create an exciting program of activities throughout the year for you. Just to give you one example, I'm currently working with an organization called Oracle for Research. It's an organization that belongs to the well-known company Oracle, and we will be doing training sessions for our current PhD students, doctoral candidates, around using cloud for their PhD project. So things like that, which are offered across the network, are something that it's under my responsibility. I have scheduled for about 2 hours for today's seminar. From experience, it usually takes about an hour and a half. If you have either engagements, feel free to drop out of the session. As I said, I will be recording the session, and the recording will be made available on the SeNSS website. Now, what we will be covering today, I will be talking about why doing a PhD. I will be talking about what is SeNSS, give you an overview of the consortium and what is on offer. And then I want to focus on two more things around the PhD. The first one, which is a challenge that most of you might face, is finding the appropriate supervisor and talking to the appropriate supervisor. So I'm going to give you some hints and tips around finding the supervisor, contacting them, what they might ask you to do, and things like that. And then, of course, writing a proposal. Now, obviously, writing a proposal could be, a whole day's workshop. So, and we don't have this amount of time. But what I will try to do is I will try to give you a sense of what are expectations, or how do we evaluate proposals, and almost reverse engineer the process and tell you what are the things you need to be incorporating into your research proposal in order to make it successful. I have been doing this role for quite a number of years now. I have been running the student-led competition, looking at proposals and helping panel members to evaluate proposals for a number of years. So I will be picking up on this experience and helping you understand what makes a good proposal, what the reviewers will be looking to read and see in your proposal to make it a strong one. Now, first question, why do a PhD? And this is a crucial question that you will be asked by any potential supervisor. So I want to just highlight a few ideas there. in order to help you address this question. You know, one of the most important questions that we ask our supervisors, and I've supervised students in the past, and I'm currently supervising doctoral candidates. The key question that I ask, you know, why do you want to do a PhD? And obviously, it's an important question, not only for your supervisor to understand your motivation, but also for you to be able to articulate why you're doing a PhD. Now, the very, very typical kind of approach is that we tend to think about the PhD as a qualification that leads into an academic career. So students who obtain PhDs want to become professors. Only the best doctoral students become professors, and the careers of PhDs are relatively linear. You go from a PhD to an assistant, then to an associate, then to a full professor. And in reality, these common assumptions are no longer true. The PhD, at least in the way we see it within SeNSS, it is a qualification that should open the doors to a number of different careers. It's a qualification that should allow you to develop skills that will enable you to work across a number of different organizations, not simply fulfilling an academic career. How do we achieve that? We achieve that by, for example, giving you the opportunity to undertake a funded placement. What is a funded placement? A funded placement is a funded period of your studies, up to 3 months, that you basically put your PhD and your research aside. And what you then do is you work within an organization. Sometimes it could be a public policy-making organization. For example, we've got a number of internships with the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. It could be a business. It could be a charity. And what you do is you work. Effectively with that organization in order to solve a problem, help them develop some policy, help them understand consumers. And during that period, you are then able to develop those skills that will help you work in roles outside the academia. So what I want to do is I want to first of all say, you know, if you're thinking of a PhD, and if you're thinking of a PhD as an academic qualification, yes, it is still one of those options, but equally, the PhD is also a qualification that can lead into a number of other roles, into a number of other careers. And the training we do, the support we offer, for example, we have employability sessions with a professional coach that helps our students which are reaching the end of their funding period to think about those career trajectories, to think about those career routes. We do that in order to help you think about securing a job, not necessarily within academia, but also outside the academia. So there are these two very different routes that the PhD that we currently offer is a qualification that will allow you to explore. Now, when it comes to the motivation for doing a PhD, there are a number of different purposes. And this is a slide that you can use to self-reflect and also use it to discuss with your supervisor your potential motivation. The first one is what we call instrumental purposes, and it's directly related to your career. What do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do with your professional life? Do you want to become an academic? Yes, the PhD prepares you for that. Do you want to work for a research organization? Yes, the PhD prepares you for that. Do you want to develop crucial skills that will allow you to change career? Perhaps some of you might be mature students and you might be thinking, oh, it's actually a good opportunity for me securing some funding here from SeNSS and also changing my career or undertaking additional research on a particular project. So your instrumental purposes, you know, where you want to go with your career, is actually quite important. The second bit is around what we call the intellectual purposes. And sometimes these intellectual purposes are related to your personal interest, to your satisfaction, to the contribution to the discipline. And from a supervisor point of view, this is actually quite an important motivation to demonstrate to any supervisor that you really have a passion about the discipline. You really have a problem that you've identified, that it's a burning flame within you, in a sense. And I can give you an example of what does it mean for an experienced researcher like myself. For example, I do a lot of work, empirical work, on foreign direct investments, multinational enterprises, institutional frameworks, and how those institutional frameworks influence the decision of multinational enterprises. That's my area of expertise. I'm a professor of international business. And I do work with a lot of data sets. And occasionally, you know, after a very long day, I have a data set which is complete in front of me. I have incorporated that data set into my statistical software that I use to do my empirical analysis. And the question there is, you know, it's quite late in the evening, you're very tired, you perhaps have a family that is waiting for you at home or downstairs if you're working from home. Equally, you've got in front of you a sample that is ready to talk to you, is ready to give you the first results, you know. And most of the times, I'm actually very eager to press the button and look at what those initial results tell me before I switch off for the day. And that's my personal interest. This is, you know, it gives me satisfaction because I can then find out what the data tells me. You know, are multinationals influencing institutional frameworks? Are they not? And it's that passion that supervisors would like to see in any good PhD student, in any good doctoral candidate, in order to kind of help them and support them in their journey. And the PhD is a relatively long journey. It's a 3-year minimum journey. It's a journey that you will have to do it on your own most of the time. It has fantastic peaks, but fantastic drops at the same time. It has brilliant moments, and it could have challenging and difficult moments. And it's that personal interest, that satisfaction, that kind of passion to contribute to the discipline that will help you navigate through that journey. And then, of course, there is the third purpose here, which is what I would call the altruistic purpose, which a lot of us have, you know, around solving problems, around enabling change, benefiting others. SeNSS and the institutions that contribute to SeNSS have a particular focus and emphasis on aspects of sustainability. We think about the Sustainable Development Goals and how social sciences can actually contribute to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. We're, you know, less than 10 years away from the first milestone of the Sustainable Development Goals, and research is the one that will provide a lot of answers to those questions. So you might have these altruistic purposes, you might have all three purposes. You know, you might have an element of instrumental, an element of intellectual, an element of altruistic. And this slide is a good guiding slide to help you reflect, think, and perhaps then put that information across to your supervisor in order to justify why you want to do a PhD. Now, I've mentioned earlier that one of the things we do is prepare you for careers outside the academia. And I just want to share with you some data from Vitae. Vitae is an organization that we do work together in order to train researchers. This is some data that Vitae produced a few years back, describing and giving you a picture of where doctoral candidates do after they finish their studies. You know, it's doctoral destinations. And you can obviously see, you know, the light purple bars are social sciences. You could see that there is still a significant proportion of social scientists that end up in teaching and lecturing in higher education roles, but equally, a significant proportion, over 50%, go into research occupations, other research organizations, not in higher education. They do other doctoral occupations like charities, organizations in the public domain, public policy making organizations. So what I'm saying here is that, the PhD is not necessarily a qualification that leads towards only an academic career, but it's a qualification that leads into other careers as well. The challenge there is for you to shape it in a way, obviously with our support and our help, in order to develop those crucial skills that will secure a job at the end of your PhD, either within the academia or outside the academia, depending on what you want to achieve. Now, that's the first bit, which is around the motivation and why do a PhD. I'll talk a bit about making sense of SeNSS, the Southeast Network for Social Sciences, and I'll start talking also about the competitions and the opportunities we offer here. So first of all, what is SeNSS? SeNSS is what we call a doctoral training partnership. We receive funding from an organization which is called the Economic and Social Research Council. And this is one of the 7 councils that are funded by UK Research and Innovation. So the UK government has this big instrument, which is the UK Research and Innovation. That instrument receives funding from the government on an annual basis, and the role of that instrument is to then delegate that funding to the 7 research councils. The ESRC, or the Economic and Social Research Council, is the one that covers social sciences. There is, for example, the Arts and Humanities Research Council. There is the Natural Environment Research Council. There is the Sciences Research Council, so on and so forth. So each one covering different areas. And those then councils are responsible to fund one research projects. And these are projects that established academics attract in institutions, but also prepare the next generation of doctoral researchers, doctoral candidates. And at the moment, the ESRC funds 14 doctoral training partnerships across the UK and Northern Ireland. Now, one of those 14 is SeNSS, is the Southeast Network for Social Sciences, and we offer studentships, so funding for doctoral candidates, and also we offer postdoctoral fellowships on an annual basis for those students that they have completed the doctoral studies and they want to do a fellowship, they want to do a postdoctoral fellowship. We still have some funding there for these kind of opportunities. It's not a substantial amount of money. It's in contrast to the studentship competition. The postdoctoral fellowship competition is much smaller. We have usually about 6 to 8 doctoral fellows, but it's still an opportunity that you might wish to consider later on once you're approaching the end of your studies. Now, the ESRC on an annual basis awards about 500 postgraduate studentships. Ourselves, every year we basically give over 40 studentships. It's a very competitive process. I need to highlight that early in this seminar. It's a very competitive process in the sense that last year, overall, SeNSS attracted something in the region of 800 applications. And those 800 applications come from across the world. They are submitted in the 10 institutions that form SeNSS. You can see those institutions there: East Anglia, Essex, Reading, Surrey, Sussex, Kent, Goldsmiths, Royal Holloway City, and Roehampton. And there is an open competition and a robust selection process that enables us to select out of those 700 to 800 applications, the top 40. So it is a competitive process. Equally, we do attract quite a substantial number of high quality applications, and we do our best every year to extend as much as possible the number of studentships we offer. Now, obviously, the number varies every year because occasionally, for example, students have a need for more training, or other students have what we call an overseas fieldwork element into their project, and therefore that eats from our budget. But just to give you a sense of volume, those 40 studentships on an annual basis are approximately the equivalent of £2.5 million of funding we receive from ESRC. So what do we offer and why you should be applying to SeNSS for your studentship and your funding? We offer innovative and challenging world-class doctoral training. The example I used with Oracle for Research is one. We're trying to train you at cutting-edge technologies. Last year, for example, we had two special workshops. It was actually a series of workshops. One was on the Digital Scholars series, and that was a series of workshops that would enable doctoral candidates to understand digitization in social sciences. So, for example, we had workshops around web scraping, text mining, using YouTube, using Twitter for research purposes, so on and so forth. And also, we had a very interesting series of workshops around decolonizing research. And there is a big discussion at the moment across a number of disciplines about decolonization of research, whether research has been influenced significantly by, what we would consider authors in the Western part of the world, and whether we should be having a better balance between research subjects and research approaches from around the world. Obviously, except from this high-level training, which is open to everyone within SeNSS, we've got subject-specific, either generic or advanced training. Sometimes this is specific to your individual needs, and there is, of course, funding available on top of your studentship. We've got a pot of money which we call Research Support Training Grant that on an annual basis you can tap into. It's about £800 every year, up to a maximum of £3,500 for the duration of your PhD, that you can basically tap and pay for training that you would like to do. We've got a strategic partnership with Sage, the publisher, and that gives you access to Sage Campus, which contains a number of online materials around designing research projects, quantitative and qualitative methods, and all these are online. You can do them at your own time. You obviously get access to the 10 institutions across the DTP and databases that might be available in those 10 institutions. We've got 200 external organizations with work placement opportunities. I've mentioned SAGE and POST, the Parliamentary Office for Science Technology already. We offer you additional funding for overseas visits, fieldwork, conferences, academic publishing. We run our own annual conference every July with a specific theme. Last summer's conference was hosted by the University of Surrey, and the key topic was around artificial intelligence and the role of social sciences. We discussed a number of, for example, ethical questions that emerge from the use of artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. And then all that is included in what we call our virtual learning environment. It's a Moodle X platform that allows you to tap into those resources, look at training which is available online, apply for training, and it's basically a website that contains everything we do within SeNSS. So we are there a step ahead of a lot of others out there in terms of the training offering. Now, who's who within SeNSS? You've met me, which I'm the deputy director. The rest of the team is based at the University of Essex. We've got the director, who's Professor Ismini Gizelis, a political scientist. You've got the manager, Dr. Felicity Sesnat, and then you've got the coordinator, Rachel Layton-Jones. as I said, the other 3 members of the core team are based at the University of Essex, who's the coordinating institution. I'm the only one who's based elsewhere. I'm at the University of East Anglia, but I work very closely with everyone. Throughout your doctoral studies, and obviously throughout your application process, you will be liaising predominantly with members of staff within your home institution, if I put it this way, and then aspects of your application will be reviewed by myself and other colleagues. So myself and the people at your home institution will be predominantly the 2 key points of contact throughout the application process until eventually you receive the offer letter for your studies. Right. There is a question which is, I understand that you receive applications from all over the world, but could you tell me if successful students have to physically live in the UK during their studies? The answer is yes. So you need to physically live in the UK during your studies in order to kind of maintain the terms of funding. The only time, Catherine, that you are allowed to travel abroad and stay abroad is if your project has an embedded element of an overseas fieldwork visit. So, for example, a lot of our social anthropologists do this kind of projects that require them to go and study and work in another location for an extensive period of time, sometimes could be up to 9 months. Or if there is an overseas institutional visit, which again, it's part of your PhD. What you do is you visit another overseas institution. We pay for your travel expenses, your accommodation expenses, as well as any registration fees. And that is a period of up to 3 months. Otherwise, once you receive the offer, the condition, one of the conditions of that offer from your home institution will be to effectively live and study in the UK. What about part-time studies if a candidate is employed? Yosif is asking, if a candidate is employed full-time, are they eligible for a part-time studentship and are they able to undertake one? Yes, all candidates are allowed to secure a part-time. What happens in terms of the part-time applications is we need to ensure that your part-time PhD is not actually undertaken together with a full-time job. So you would need to switch your full-time job to a part-time job and then do a part-time PhD. So in reality, you can't exceed X number, which I think at the moment is about 40 hours per week, undertaking both the PhD and a paid employment. And of course, you know, the time that it takes, the funding basically is adjusted pro rata, so it could take up to 8 years sometimes of funding because you basically might be receiving half of your funding on an annual basis. I'll answer that question about different universities with different projects in a minute. And Zoe, no, you can't do a full-time PhD and a part-time job. Most universities will actually question that. Depends on what we mean by part-time job. So if it's a part-time job, which is just a couple of hours a week, usually not more than, you know, up to 10 hours a week, that in most cases is something that you can negotiate. For example, a lot of our students are undertaking additional teaching activities every week, but the general principle is that the amount of time you're spending on your PhD and the amount of time you're spending on your employment, it shouldn't exceeding those 40 hours per week. Mohammed, I'll come back to your question as well. So we've got the 2 additional questions around different universities and different projects, and the whether you can apply if you've started your PhD. And yes, I'll address those 2 questions in a minute. So this is the way SeNSS and pathways work like. One of the key important things that I need to highlight here is that in order to make an application to any of those universities, that university needs to participate in the pathway that you want to apply. Example, you want to do a PhD in business and management, you can apply through City, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Reading, Royal Holloway, Surrey, and Sussex. Unfortunately, Goldsmiths and Rockhampton are not options for a PhD in business and management. You want to apply for a PhD in sociology, you can apply through City, Essex, Goldsmiths, Kent, and Sussex. The other institutions do not offer that option. So you need to ensure that whichever institution you're applying through actually participates in that pathway, and that is information which is available on the website. So if you're still thinking about making an application, you need to, for example, ensure that you're applying to those institutions that participate in that pathway in order to be eligible for the funding. Very quickly, the SeNSS is managed by what we call the management board. We've got the student forum, which is a student voice. We've got a collaborative advisory group, the students and the supervisors. This is the community of SeNSS. And in order to make an application, you've got 3 steps that you need to follow. The first one is apply for a PhD place at your home institution. Now, I can pick up that question here around applying for different universities with different projects. You can apply to different home institutions with different projects or even with the same project. So, for example, someone wants to do business and management and they have identified supervisors at Kent and Reading. They can apply for a PhD both at the University of Kent and the University of Reading. They can only then make one application for SeNSS through one of those 2 institutions. So the fact that you've applied for securing a PhD at Kent and Reading doesn't mean that you are then eligible to apply for SeNSS funding both from Kent or Reading. You need to make a decision through which institution you can apply. So application for a PhD, you can apply to as many institutions as you like. Application for funding to SeNSS can only come through one institution out of the ones that you have selected for potential hosting you as a PhD, as a doctoral candidate. So that's one important thing to bear in mind. And it's really, really important to think about which is the institution that will support your application, which is the institution that will take you forward. And this is why the application, usually the application deadline for securing a place at the home institution is earlier than the application deadline for SeNSS, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Once you've done that, then you can create a higher education HEI apply account, which is a software that we use, and you can find a lot of information on the guidance, and you develop your proposal with your supervisor and you submit your online application. So these are the 3 kind of steps. Now, you can apply if you have already started your PhD. The rule is you can apply if you've only done 1 year of your PhD. So the ESRC requires us to allow funding for students that have at least 50% of their studies left in their PhD. So if you've started last year your PhD and you want to apply for funding this year, you are eligible to apply for funding. The only disclaimer I need to make there is that you will only receive funding for the remaining time. So you won't be receiving funding for 3 years, but if you've got 2 more years left, you will be receiving funding for those 2 years. Let me just quickly go through if there are any other questions I can pick up now. Is the students only available for students who enter the school in September 2023, beginning of April 2023? Can I apply for this studentship? So if you've started, if your starting is earlier, you can apply for the studentship, but as I said earlier, you will only receive funding for what is the remaining. So in this case, if someone starts in April 2023, their PhD, for example, and they're successful for funding, they will only attract funding for 2.5 years, not 3 years. I don't hold a bachelor's degree, but have a master's degree and an offer for a 1+3 study in a university supported by SeNSS. Can I apply for the SeNSS scholarship? Yes, you can apply for the SeNSS scholarship. You will probably have to apply for a 1+3, and I'll come back to that training element in a minute. Is there a difference between a proposal submitted to the university and to SeNSS? That's a very good question. Yes, there could be a difference. Technically, there is no difference. So technically, the same proposal that you submit to the university can be submitted to SeNSS. But what usually happens is a lot of the universities are asking for your proposal to be submitted before the SeNSS deadline to do two things. One is to sift through the applicants that have applied and ensure that they put forward only the strongest ones. And also, what they do is they then provide you some feedback on the original proposal, which you can then revise and submit to SeNSS. So there could be a difference between the proposal you submit to your home institution and SeNSS, in the sense that that proposal that you submit to SeNSS might have received some feedback from your supervisor, your host institution. Sometimes host institutions ask students to undertake interviews, and during that process of the interview, you're given feedback, and then you can incorporate that feedback to your proposal in order to strengthen it for SeNSS. If I apply for the 1+3 route this year and don't get it, can I apply again for the 3 route the year after? I'll come back to that in a minute. And if our previous degree is taught in English, then do we still need an international proficiency certificate like IELTS? Now, if your original degree is in English, technically no, but that is not a SeNSS requirement. This is part of the admission process from your home institution. So the home institution will ask you and will tell you whether they need to see an IELTS certificate. So at SeNSS, we don't see those certificates. At SeNSS, we don't see references. At SeNSS, we only see the proposal and we evaluate the proposal. So we make the assumption that the students that the institutions, the universities are putting forward to SeNSS, or they're supporting. So you could do an application to SeNSS, but then you will also need to be supported by your home institution, have gone through all these checks in terms of English language requirements, other qualifications, so on and so forth. Zoe, the question there is, if I apply for the 1+3 route this year and don't get it, can I apply again for the +3 route the year after? The answer is yes. So there have been cases in the past where a student applied this year for the 1+3. They were not successful, but they have already secured the master's place. They decided to go and do their master's, work with their supervisor, submit a dissertation, and then apply for the +3 route next year. So the answer is yes, you could do that. Bear in mind that the 1+3 route is less competitive than the +3. So we receive less applications for the 1+3 route than the +3 route, and therefore those applications for the 1+3 usually have better chances of securing a scholarship. So that's something that you need to take into consideration. Now, some important information here in terms of and I've mentioned a lot of the things already through your questions. First of all, you don't need to have a master's to apply for a +3. You might cover that with what we call equivalent professional experience. You might cover that through an undergraduate degree that has a significant training element. Now, the person that you need to be discussing that with is your proposed supervisor. And we also have a tool, which I'll show you in a minute, that might help you understand what you need to apply for. As I said, all studentships are offered on a full or part-time basis, on a 3 or 4 year basis, if it's a 1+3 or a +3. Fully funded. It doesn't matter whether you're an international candidate or a home candidate, you will receive the stipend. The stipend is a pot of money that goes towards your cost of living. ESRC has recently added 10%, so inflated that stipend by 10%. So at the moment, it's just under £18,000 per year. For those of you that you're applying to London institutions, London-based institutions, there is an additional £2,000 allowance annually to that stipend. And then, of course, your tuition fees, both for your master's as well as your PhD, irrespective of whether you're an international or home candidate, will be paid for the duration of your funded studentship. So if your funded studentship is for 3 years, we will be paying your fees for those 3 years. Obviously, if you have to extend that period for writing up or anything like that beyond the 3 years, then of course you will have to pay those additional fees yourselves. So check your eligibility. If eligible, apply to your chosen university, discuss your application with your supervisor, and then apply for the SeNSS studentship. Check with the home institution or home institutions what is their deadline, because some of the home institutions might have deadlines earlier than the SeNSS deadline. Together, this year, the SeNSS application, so the application for us, for you to submit to SeNSS through the higher HEI apply, is 12 o'clock noon on Friday, the 20th of January. But a lot of the institutions might have application deadlines earlier than that. So you need to check the application for those institutions first. In no case, the deadline of those institutions will be later than the SeNSS one. So the SeNSS will be the final deadline on the 20th of January. Most of those institutions, as I said, and I can't say it enough times, most of those institutions might have application deadlines earlier than the 20th of January. So make sure, I've had it happen to me once with a very good PhD student, that they missed the deadline for their home institution by a single day. They thought that it was the 30th and it was the 31st and it was the 30th, the deadline, and we lost the opportunity to apply for funding. Ensure that you keep an eye out on the deadlines for your home institutions. There is only one, so there is a question about how many times SeNSS applications open throughout the year. There's only one window, and that's the window of the 20th of January. We ran one competition for student-led projects, and we ran another competition for what we call collaborative projects, which has very similar deadlines, but these are projects that are already drafted by supervisors. So you are applying to an existing project and you simply need to demonstrate your fit to that project. But for the student-led, there is only one. Royal Holloway, as far as I remember, Royal Holloway is considered a London-based university for the allowance. I think institutions that are within the M25 radius are considered London-based institutions for the London allowance, but I need to double check with Felicity for that, Gabriel. Francisco is asking about sometimes the number of works in the research proposal change between universities. In this sense, do we have a minimum number of words for the research proposal that we need to send to SeNSS? Yes, I'll explain all that in a minute when I talk about the proposals. Now, here I just need to highlight again, you're permitted to submit as many applications you want to home institutions, but when it comes to the SeNSS application process, you're only permitted to submit one application for a student-led studentship. You can't do more than one. You can apply to as many collaborative studentships you like. So at the moment we've got, we're about to launch the student recruitment phase for the collaborative projects. These are 10 collaborative projects between supervisors and external collaborations that will receive funding from SeNSS. The advertisement for those projects will go out very soon in findthephd.com and jobs.ac.uk, as well as on our website. For those projects, you can apply to as many as you like. So you can apply to all 10 of them if you feel that you can fit the criteria that each project has put together. For the student-led competition, you're only allowed to apply through one institution. Can we apply to two different DTPs, SeNSS and LIS, at the same time? Yes, the answer is you can apply to as many DTPs as you like at the same time. And then obviously, if you are a strong candidate and you get both offers, you can select which DTP you go and study with. So you can apply to as many as 14 DTPs as you like. The scholarship for the 1+3 route will cover 4 years. So yes, the 1+3 route covers 1 year, which is usually the master's year, and then 3 years, which is usually the PhD years. Some universities have what we call the 2+2 model or the +4 model. So two years of research masters or an MPhil, and then 2 years of writing a thesis, or 4 years where you've got an integrated master's towards a PhD. Again, all these cases attract funding for the duration of the program. So the 4 years in total. Now, in terms of choice of studentship and type of studentship, because I can see there are a couple of questions around that. One of the things you need to bear in mind is that the SRC asks us to ensure that you have received some basic training around quantitative, qualitative, research design methods before you start your PhD. So for those cases, we offer these different models. So you offer the 1+3, the 2+2, the +4, so on and so forth. There are a number of routes here. Route number 1 is you have done an approved master's in one of the SeNSS-based institutions. I've got the hyperlink there for those masters. The list of masters is on the SeNSS website. In that case, you automatically apply for a +3. You don't need to undertake a second master's. Second route is you have done a master's in another institution that covers significant elements of training. You might also have some professional experience. We ask you in your application to tell us what elements of training you have covered. We evaluate that application, and we can then tell you that you're going to apply for a +3, or you can apply for a +3. If we feel that there are some minor gaps, we might suggest in the offer letter that you receive that you do what we call a 3.5 or a 3.25. So you get additional funding that will enable you in the first year of your PhD to basically do some additional training. So you get funding for 3.25 of a year or 3.5 years. If you've done a master's in a very different discipline, or a master's that doesn't have any training, then in that case, we will ask you to do what we call a 1+3, to undertake a master's. One of the existing masters that we have checked for those training, the list, the masters on the list, we will ask you to do that additional masters. We will fund that masters ourselves under the 1+3 route. And in cases where you haven't done a master's, you come straight from your undergraduate. In the vast majority, unless of course you've got demonstrable professional experience in a research role, we will again offer you the opportunity to undertake a master's as well as a PhD, all fully funded. How do we go about, how you need to go about thinking about which route you need to be applying? Well, there can be two routes. First one is a discussion with your supervisor. So you discuss with your supervisor should be the first person that can tell you, look, you need to have additional training or not. Obviously, if there are additional questions around that, you could always email me and ask me very specific. Now, in order to give you an informed decision, you would need to send me a transcript and some information on the training that you have done. And based on that information, I will then be able to tell you, look, you probably need to apply for a 1+3 or a +3 or a 3.25. Usually you don't apply for a 3.5 or a 3.25. You apply for a +3 or a 1+3, and we then during the selection process we make that decision for you, and we offer you the option in the offer letter. The second thing, which is an innovation we've included and introduced this year, is the use of a calculator. What is this calculator? Well, this is a Qualtrics survey that will ask you a number of questions around your prior training. You can take information from your master's, your undergraduate, your professional experience, answer those questions, and at the end of that survey, there will be a recommendation. It's an automatic process, so it doesn't come without any problems, but you know, it's a very good training calculator that we have established. It will tell you which route might be the most appropriate for you. Again, the hyperlink is going to be on the slides, and as it's a series of questions, you answer them in the most honest way, and it doesn't come to us. We don't look at that. It's for you to basically use it for your own application. And what it will tell you at the end of the survey is what is the suggested route you should be following. Obviously, the final decision lies with SeNSS. You can take that with your supervisor, together with the supervisor, and discuss the outcomes. Let me just pick up a couple of other questions to see whether there are any. Can I apply for 1+3 if I have secured PhD admission? Yes, the answer is you can apply for 1+3 even if you have secured PhD admission, because we might view your training as not necessarily appropriate to do a PhD. So there is a question here: why someone who might have already started a PhD might need to do a 1+3? And the answer is that the ESRC, what they do is they say, before you start a PhD, a funded PhD, you need to be able to train yourself holistically as a researcher. So they don't only look at your technical skills, but they also look at whether you're able to understand both quantitative and qualitative research. So sometimes the masters you might have done prepare you for a specific PhD, so a very technical PhD with quantitative aspects, but they might not have given you the qualitative element that you need. And in that case, we ask you to go and do that master's in order to cover those areas. Sometimes we ask you to do a full master's, sometimes we ask you to do what we call the 3.5, which is an alternative route in order to avoid doing a whole master's. When applying for the 1+3, should applications be made at the university for the master and PhD separately? No, it's at the same time as you apply for that PhD, you're indicating that you want to apply for a SeNSS-funded PhD, which is going to cover the 1+3. And then, of course, the university can guide you towards which masters you should be applying towards in order to get that. And the admission, assuming that you secure SeNSS funding, the admission is automatic onto the masters for you to do that. Someone, I think, posted the approved masters. I'll post a link as well. How do we know what masters are approved? So I've mentioned already, these are the masters which are on the website. I'll post the link here in a minute. On the approved PhD program, say, I see the program I'm going to choose says it's structure +4 instead of not specified on form. I can choose 4 years regardless whether I have a master's or not. So yes, if the program says it's a +4 program, then that is effectively a program that has an integrated master's, and that integrated master's is part of the PhD. So you don't do a separate master. So in reality, when it comes to the qualification, you won't be getting a separate master's and a separate PhD. You will be getting the qualification of the PhD. Let me just go and post the link on the website. When we awarded the SeNSS scholarship, do we have to pursue the research that we proposed, or the research can be changed in time? Now, when you get scholarship from SeNSS funded scholarship, you need to basically stick with the project you have applied for. There have been cases in the past, and obviously, you know, these cases have been cases where, for example, students had to change the program of studies or the project because they had significant issues with COVID. So in this case, and I've just posted the link on the chat for you there of the approved masters. So there have been cases in the past where the project was unfeasible. There is a process you can change that, but that process requires you to send us a form which tell us why you're changing, what are the major changes, and that form needs to be approved by the SeNSS core team, effectively myself, in order to allow you to change your project. I'm not talking about minor changes. I'm talking about a general change of the project. So the general change of the project has to be approved by SeNSS in order for you to proceed. So Ed is asking that there is a question I come across when filling the application form. Is your project able to be delivered within the funding available, either up to £700 per year or up to the maximum of 3? Yes. So this is around your training, your additional training needs. So if someone, for example, let's take an example here. If someone wants to do a project which requires the development of highly specialized quantitative skills, and there is only one provider around the world that trains you for those skills, and that provider basically says, I need £10,000 to deliver that training, then the answer to that question is no. It's not feasible within the £3,500 that we offer you. That doesn't necessarily mean that your project will be unsuccessful. It means that if we decide to fund your project, we need to take into consideration that you will have this additional need for funding that effectively we would need to support in the future. And of course, you would need to tell us why you need that additional training. So a lot of the aspects of the application, when they ask you to make, to provide us information around financial aspects of your PhD, are there not to evaluate your project per se, but to help us plan for future needs of your project. And in that sense, I said, we've got £2.5 million a year. If there are, for example, 10 projects that require significantly higher training costs, then we might not be able to offer 40 scholarships, but we might be able to offer 39 scholarships because we want to support those additional, those projects that have these additional training costs. Okay, so it's not to evaluate your project, it's just to give us a sense of financial planning for that. They're not approved PhDs. You wouldn't be seeing approved PhDs, you would be seeing approved masters. The approved PhDs on that list are only approved. Zoe is asking that there is no approved PhD. They're not approved PhDs. The approved PhDs that you see on that link are only PhDs that have an integrated master's. Technically, all PhDs offered by SeNSS universities are eligible for funding. It's only for masters or integrated PhDs that they need to be on that list. Right, so that's all about the application process in terms of the technical elements. Let me just very quickly skim through the questions and see whether there is anything else. So the only one which I can see that I haven't addressed is a technical question around the upload of documentations that you need. So technically what we ask you to do is upload your statements, your transcripts. For the SeNSS application, we have effectively stripped a lot of the additional information. Why? We are trying to avoid as much as possible what we call the unconscious bias. So we don't ask for references as part of the SeNSS application process. We don't ask for additional CVs. We ask for your transcripts, your proposal, and your supervisor statement. We have found in the past that a lot of this additional information tends to advantage students coming from different types of backgrounds or disadvantage other students coming from other backgrounds. So we are only asking for the SeNSS application, the bare minimum that the panel will consider for the next stage of the application. So in reality, your CV is not necessarily part of the consideration. You have a section in your application, which is your personal statement section, which talks about, your motivation, your skills, and all the fit with the project you're talking about, which is where the panel will draw information to make their evaluation. So you need to upload only what is required as part of the upload system. And yes, if you are applying for if you're applying for a +3, the master's degree certificate is what you can apply instead of the bachelor certificate. So I'll pick up this question, the last question. What are the specifications of proposal needed for a 1+3 since it starts with a master's degree? I'll pick it up now, and then I'll tell you a bit about finding the supervisor and the proposal itself. In terms of our evaluation process, there are two streams of that evaluation process. There is the stream that we evaluate students that have a master's which has prepared them for PhD, and they're applying for a +3. So this is a separate group of applicants. And then the other stream are the applicants that are applying for a 1+3. Now there are two groups in that stream. There is the group of master's of students that hold the masters, but that masters hasn't trained them properly to do a PhD. And there is, of course, those students that come straight from their undergraduate. And we have asked panels, and we will provide panels the information this year to evaluate those groups separately. So the panel will take into consideration the quality of your proposal and will compare it with other proposals that are coming from undergraduate students. So that's one group. The panel will look into your proposal and will compare it with other proposals of students that have a master's, but it's not a master's that has prepared them for training. And then the panel will look at proposals that are coming from students that hold the master's, and that master's has prepared them appropriately for training for a PhD. So in reality, there's going to be 3 separate groups, and the expectations there are adjusted according to that group. So you will only be compared with students that have candidates that have exactly the same qualifications and preparation for a PhD. And obviously the quality that we would expect for a proposal coming from an undergraduate student will be slightly different than the quality we would expect someone who has done a master's, with training and research methods and everything like that. That said, you can actually sometimes be surprised by how good the quality of those undergraduate student applications are, and occasionally they're very, very good quality, and sometimes they're even better than some of the +3 applications. So yes, the next question is around international students. Yes, so for international students, there is currently a quota of 30%. And the way we approach it is that we can fill those applications up to that 30%. The equivalent is about 12 to 15 applications, depending on how many scholarships we give annually. Now, we haven't had a problem filling that quota so far, because we receive quite a lot of international applications every year. If in the event that we don't have 30% of international candidates, we provide that to home students. So the way it works is we've got a big list, well, actually 3 big lists with all the projects that we have evaluated on the +3, all the projects that we have evaluated on the 1+3 with the masters, and all the projects we have evaluated on the 1+3 without the masters. And what we do is we go down those lists and award to the best quality projects. As we go down, we calculate the proportion of international students we have. If, as we go down, we've reached the 30%, we stop awarding to international students. If we haven't reached the 30%, we go further down that list up to the point where we have exceeded or we have reached the number of scholarships we have given. So there might be the case where there is more than 12 international students, and in that case, we won't be able to give all these awards. So we will stop only at the 30%. There might be those cases where, you know, we didn't have enough international applications equally, and therefore we had to fill those places, the additional places, with home students. There is one specific question around 1+3 and professional experience. That's yes. So Priyasha, the best thing to do is to discuss that with a potential supervisor and then email me about your application. So we can take that offline. It's a slightly specific case. And Ed, I've mentioned already that you can apply for, you can submit your master's certificate. Yes, Mary, you can. So Mary asks, can a student who deferred apply for SeNSS? Yes, you can apply for SeNSS. You have already secured the place, so you can then apply for SeNSS, and your application. So if you have secured the place for a PhD, your application will consider for SeNSS funding only. It won't be considered for, you know, giving you a place on the university. So if you've got already your place, you can go straight and apply for SeNSS. Right, 2 more things that I want to discuss as part of the application process. One is really crucial, which is finding a supervisor. I don't know how many of you've got a supervisor, but usually is the most daunting task as part of our PhD journey. There are 2 routes here that you can follow. One is that you don't know your institution, but you know the topic. You have a general idea about the topic you want to investigate, the topic you want to examine. You need to find out where an appropriate supervisor might be. So in that case, a very good starting point would be to use Google Scholar, use keywords from your topics, and find supervisors that are working in the 10 SeNSS-based institutions. If you have an initial idea about the potential institution, so for example, someone says, oh, I want to study at the University of Sussex because Sussex is considered the leading institution, for example, in development studies. So if you look at development studies, Sussex is a very strong institution. If you look, for example, at political science, Essex is a very strong institution. If you look at sustainability, University of East Anglia is a very strong institution. If you look at finance, City is a very strong institution. So you've got these kind of initial starting points. Then in that case, you can go directly to the university website. I've got two examples there. A lot of those universities will have links for potential supervisors. They've got what we call a find an expert type of links, and you can then use those links to search for a supervisor. So you found now who might be the supervisor, and what is really, really important is this first communication. So some of you might have an existing relationship with someone because they have been your master's dissertation supervisor, or you might build that relationship throughout your master's. But if we're considering what we call a cold email and a cold approach to a supervisor, bear in mind that supervisors might be receiving 3, 4, 5 emails requesting supervision on a daily basis. Someone with an established profile in their discipline usually receives at least 2 to 3 a day. More senior people can receive 3 or 4. So what is really important is to get your communication to stand out, to convince them that you're a serious candidate, to convince them that you are someone that can work with, and that you have something new to say in terms of the discipline. So what I always suggest is start the email by addressing them properly. If it's a professor, you say, "Dear Professor X." If it's a doctor, you say, "Dear Dr. X." You try to keep the tone a bit formal, at least in the first email, because this is a cold email. This is an email that, it's a person, it's an individual you haven't met before. So, I would never start my email saying, "Hi there," or hi doctor," or that. The first kind of opening sentence needs to be a formal kind of sentence, at least in the initial stages of your communication. The other important bit is to tell them something interesting about yourself. So someone in the Priyasha, for example, mentioned earlier, I've got professional experience, 1 year of research experience, so on and so forth. That's a very interesting fact. You automatically pick their interest. Someone that has worked in a research role, someone that has some research experience. Tell them something interesting about yourself. There might be that you've done an interesting dissertation, or there might that you have done an interesting project in your undergraduate studies. The other very important bit is that you need to also convince them about your fit. So you explain your research interest, and then you say how your proposal matches their expertise. So, for example, your proposal might be building on one of their most recent publications. Your proposal might be an extension of one of those recent publications. So tell them about that, and tell them that you've read some of their work. That being said, moving on to the next, not the next bullet point, the bullet point after next, not make any extravagant claims. If you say you've read their publications, make sure you have. Don't try to trick the game, because a lot of the time what we do as supervisors, we go back and ask tricky questions around those publications to evaluate whether this is a true statement or not. Proofread your email, shows attention to detail, and attention to detail is really, really important for everything, including the research proposals. And then prepare for face-to-face interviews. Think of the questions they may ask you and prepare some answers. So typical questions we tend to ask during PhD interviews is, what is your motivation? Why do you think you're the most appropriate person to undertake this project? What is this project contributing to our understanding of the discipline? What might be the potential impact of this project? So these are kind of questions that you need to prepare yourselves before that interview stage. And in all this process, the communication with the supervisor has at its main goal to develop rapport, to develop an understanding, to open the communication channel. Remember, this individual, the main supervisor, or these individuals, if they're a supervisory team, in most cases, it will be a supervisory team, are there to support you throughout a 3-year-long journey. So you need to ensure that you've got this relationship built with them as early as possible. And obviously, you know, that relationship with them in terms of being able to get feedback on your proposal and work with them. So from their perspective, they will be putting time into this application. They will be putting time to help you shape your proposal. They will be putting time to help you with your research statements. They will be putting time for all these things. It's really, really important to ensure that, you know, you give them something back, and you're then able to develop that relationship with them. SeNSS does not hold interviews. It's the universities that hold interviews for their admission process and for their selection process. So at SeNSS, we don't hold interviews. At SeNSS, the process of evaluating application is performed from panels, cross-institutional panels, and then the second stage is with the management board that audits the process of evaluation and makes the final offers of degrees. So all the SeNSS-based application is desk-based, paperwork-based, not with additional interviews. So you will be called for an interview only at your home institution. The second supervisor, so here about the supervisory teams, most of the time, the vast majority of the supervisory teams come from the same institution. Within SeNSS, we have allowed for supervisory teams to come from across institutions. Now, if you want to have a supervisor from a non-SeNSS-based institution, that is something that you need to discuss with your primary supervisor and your home institution. Within SeNSS, as long as the home institution is satisfied, we won't have any restrictions about where the second supervisor should come from. Is age, another question is age an important variable for you to assess the proposals of the candidate? As I understood, SeNSS encourages younger candidates more than people in their mid-career. No, it's actually the opposite. Age, and this is why I said we're stripping everything from the application process that will identify age, gender, things like that. We don't actually take into consideration any of those factors. We have a very strong equality, diversity, and inclusivity policy and strategy. So we wouldn't advantage, put it this way, a younger candidate over older or more mature candidates. We would only look at the merits of the proposal itself and the way the candidate has explained their fit with that proposal and their prior experience. So none of these considerations are part of the evaluation process, like age, gender, nationality, and so on and so forth. So even with international candidates, for example, that's not part of our evaluation, whether you're a home or an international candidate. It only becomes part when we apply the quota on the final list. So it's not a quality issue. It's more of a technical issue that, you know, ESRC doesn't allow us to have more than 30% of our candidates coming from international backgrounds. So any factors around gender, age, disabilities, backgrounds, so on and so forth, we have made every effort the last few years to take them completely outside of the evaluation process. Right, proposal, which is the last thing that stands between you and your successful application. Obviously, the first thing you need to do is discuss your proposal with your supervisor. As I said, a lot of the institutions hold interviews before the SeNSS deadline, and they provide you with feedback. If you've received any feedback, please incorporate it. Read the application guidance notes. They're very detailed, and everything there, a lot of the questions you might have will be answered through the guidance note. And the application has 2 stages: your application form and the supervisor statement. These are completed in sequence. So the application form task must be completed before you can request the supervisor statement. So what it does, the system basically, once you've submitted your application, goes and automatically asks your supervisor, which you have provided the details for, to write a supporting statement, the supervisor or the supervisory team. And then the supervisor is auto-emailed, and they will provide their honest view on the proposal, their honest view on your fit, as well as they tell us why they feel they're the best qualified supervisor for this particular project. So the most important aspect here is to focus on this strong research proposal. And what I want to do is I want to spend the next minutes remaining to effectively reverse engineer requirements for a proposal and tell you what are the strong points you need to be putting into a research proposal in order to make it successful for SeNSS. This is the structure. So we've got 80 characters for the title, 3,800 characters for the abstract, 10,000 characters for the research proposal itself, and then 500 words, which is usually the maximum for your personal statement. So some universities require lengthier proposals. That's something that you need to take into consideration when you shorten your proposal for the SeNSS application. 3 essential ingredients: the issue, or what I would usually call in my supervision meetings, the so what question. What problems does your research address? Why is it important? The research design, how will the research achieve its objective? So what kind of design you will have in order to take that research forward? And the benefit. So what are the beneficiaries and what will the research contribute? Are you talking about research that will have particular impact, research that will shape or change practices, research that will shape or change policy? Who are the beneficiaries and how are they going to benefit from your research? So what, how, and who are the 3 essential ingredients in the proposal. Key to your application is that this needs to be discussed with your supervisor. Obviously, assessors look for high quality and strong potential for doctoral studies. And the description of the research projects, you need to include key areas, the research problems, the research context in terms of the literature, the contribution you're going to make, the methods, and everything like that. So let me unbundle a few of those and then see whether there are also any remaining questions. Very, very important, going back to what I've mentioned already about the attention to detail, typos, lack of clarity, extreme jargon, and a brief proposal with a very long references section. Now, at the SeNSS level, the proposals are evaluated from people across different areas in your discipline. So, for example, in business and management, which is a very broad area, you might have people coming from all streams of business and management, from strategy, from marketing, from organizational psychology, from HRM, reviewing your proposals. So if you're using extreme jargon and you make that proposal readable only from someone who's really, really engaged in that niche area, then you might not be able to communicate that properly. Equally, if it's a proposal that lacks clarity, or if it's a proposal which is full of typos, the panels will actually look at that and will go, well, that individual didn't put enough emphasis, didn't put enough attention to develop this proposal. Do we trust them to undertake the project they are discussing? So all these mini details are actually quite important for the final success of your proposal. There are three criteria we use to evaluate proposals: quality and feasibility, your fit with that proposal and your preparation for that proposal, and evidence of the suitability of the proposed supervision and training. So the quality of your proposal, whether you are able to undertake that proposal, and whether you have identified the right supervisor and the right training to help you and support you in those 3 years. So this is in essence what we're looking for. We score proposals between 0 and 6, with 6 is excellent. And from experience, the funding threshold for proposals over the last few years is around 5.2, 5.1, 5.2. So the proposal needs to achieve excellence in almost all criteria to be able to become fundable. So you need to demonstrate excellence in all 3 criteria: research quality, your fit, and the supervisory support, in order to have a fundable proposal. So let me explain what each one of those means. The feasibility and the quality, we assess it on the basis of your proposed research project, on your outline, and obviously the wider significance. We will take into consideration the information supplied by your proposed supervisor and their statement around the importance of this topic. But what we're looking for here is your ability to design a research project, a coherent and well thought out research plan. So when are you going to do what? And also your awareness of your position, of your place within the research field. So, how do you relate with the literature and what is the potential impact? In simple terms, you need to innovate. You need to make sure that your idea, what you're proposing, stands out. Remember that the reviewers, as part of the competition, will have to read at least 30 applications. You need to make sure that your application stands out. One of the things, I chair panels that evaluate proposals, and the worst thing that can happen to a panel is we're evaluating an application and we all try to remember what that application was about. And obviously these are the weak applications. The applications that stand out, that people remember immediately, oh, this was this fantastic project that was trying to do X, Y, Z. This is what is really important. So innovate, make sure your idea stands out. Support that. Ensure that you have adequately covered the literature, including key and up-to-date references. If your literature stops in 2015, there's a question mark there. Why? Why haven't you included more recent references? Do not under or overpromise. It's part of the feasibility question here. Obviously, we don't want to underpromise, but equally, we don't want to overpromise. You don't want to address, all sustainable development goals in your proposal. You want to do one bit of that puzzle. And ensure that you have an appropriate methodology. And what we have been asking ourselves the last few years, especially with what has happened after COVID, is whether there is also a contingency plan. The what if question, what if things don't go as you have planned? So for example, I have here, you've planned on interviews, but you haven't managed to access key participants. What will you do to address that particular issue? So this is the quality The research proposal should be of an outstanding quality, clearly articulated aims, objectives, and focus, well-defined and appropriate methodology, demonstrate that you have taken ethical considerations, impact of the proposal, and feasible within the time frame and resource limitations that you have. The second criterion is this preparation. Preparation for future career and preparations for research. This basically has two elements. It has obviously the academic qualifications, but it has also the professional and life experiences that you might have. And we give a lot of emphasis on life experiences because this is sometimes how certain type of candidates can actually convince us that they have developed and built those skills that are crucial for research. And then your supervisor will provide us with an evaluation around your performance at undergraduate and postgraduate level, your relevant professional experience, and also how the program will contribute to your long-term career aims. Going back to that first slide I've used around your motivation. So I have seen very strong proposals in this competition, but you also need to convince us that you are the most appropriate person to take it forward. You've got the right skills, the right motives, the right drive. Finally, we look at the suitability of the proposed supervision and training. And this is based on your supervisor's research areas, their knowledge, their expertise. There might be around the individual roles of the team. So you might have a first and a second supervisor, and the first supervisor is closer to the literature of your topic, and the second supervisor is probably the person that is more advanced in techniques and methods. And they bring those two complementary skills for the proposal and the supervision. And also what we ask you to do is reflect on your training needs and ways of meeting those. So we ask you to think, what are the gaps that you have and what are the things you need to develop in order to undertake this proposal? So for example, a proposal that talks about interviewing participants, and you haven't got any experience around interviewing, that is a crucial skill that you need to say, okay, and this is how I'm going to develop that skill. I've got X, Y, Z type of workshops that I can attend that prepare me for interviewing participants, so on and so forth. So you don't only need an excellent proposal and how you are the best person for the research, but you also need to demonstrate that you're supported by a team that has expertise and experience and that can identify training needs for you. And you bring that together. So it's you, your proposal, and your supervisory team that are the three pillars supporting your application. Now, a lot of the information, as I said, because we have stripped a lot of the things, like references and things like that, a lot of the information will come from your personal statement. And in this statement, you need to convince why you deserve a studentship. You can discuss your academic interests, your motivation, why you wish to study with SeNSS, why this particular university and this particular department. What is the most appealing when studying within SeNSS? It might be that it's the placement opportunities, it might be that SeNSS is offering this particular type of training, and demonstrate your preparedness by discussing the passion, your existing knowledge, your life experience, perhaps. So, for example, sometimes our instrumental motivations for selecting a topic might be related to our life experiences. We come from a less developed economy, we have seen poverty, we are keen to find out how microfinancing can help us alleviate poverty. Key motivation, very strong motivation, building on life experience. It will be welcome from the panel. Now, your proposal follows this structure: description, research background and research questions, research methods, timeline, and proposed impact. And if you work with your supervisor to develop those bullet points, I'm sure you're going to have a very good and strong proposal for submission. I've got two additional websites there. that you can visit in your own time. One is additional information on how to apply for PhD funding, and then additional information for applying for a PhD in the UK. These are very interesting websites that provide a lot of written information. Obviously, you've got the recording of the webinar today, but I appreciate that sometimes written information is easy to digest. So I've given you these two additional sources there that you can visit and read and look at them and see whether you've got any additional questions. So I'll look at my questions now. I'll try to pick up as many, and you can use the chat function if you wish. I just want to highlight that the website, the recording will be on the website of this webinar. There is one more webinar in the next 2 weeks, which is in the evening. I'm going to be covering the same information, and then there is one webinar which is on a Saturday that is predominantly a question and answer webinar. So if you've got additional questions after the two seminars, after today's seminar, you can join us then. Of course, you can always email us to ask questions, but as I said, for this stage of the competition, the predominant contact will be between you, your supervisor, and your home institution. All right, questions. Let me just pick up some of those questions that you have put in the chat. I've got a question around advanced quantitative methods and generally advanced quantitative methods or advanced qualitative methods. There is no need for your proposal to have advanced qualitative or quantitative methods to be successful. We have one scholarship every year that we ring fence for the proposal with the most advanced quantitative methods. But what we do usually is we go through the proposals that have been submitted and we identify that proposal at a later stage. So there is no separate competition for the advanced quantitative methods. If you've got an advanced quantitative methods element, you might be considered for that, but it doesn't actually change your success rate for the competition. Transcripts are needed to apply for SeNSS. Yes, transcripts are needed. Obviously, if your transcript is not available at the time of the application, you upload what we call, a temporary transcript, which is what most universities will give you. And then what might happen is that the application will be, or the offer will be subject to the successful completion of that degree or the successful completion of the successful submission of your transcript. So, not having the final transcript, it shouldn't be something that stops you from applying for SeNSS funding. SeNSS scholarship does not cover visa application and NHS fee for international students. What the SeNSS scholarship covers is the academic part of that application. There might be cases where the home institutions are able to cover the visa application fee and the NHS fee, but that's something that you need to be discussing with your home institution. Everything is desk-based, so everything is paper-based for SeNSS. There are no interviews for SeNSS after the application. So most institutions will ask you to go through an interview phase for the admission at that institution. Once you get admitted and you apply to SeNSS, there is no other interview as part of our selection process. I'm happy to share the presentation via email. I can email all of you. I've got your registration details, but also what we will do is we will put the presentation on the website together with the recording of this session. There is a question around contingency plans and should they be part of the main research proposal? Yes. So when I talked about contingency plans earlier, I mentioned contingency plans around the methodological approach. So for example, a case of securing interviews and not being able to secure interviews. You don't need to have a long section on contingency plans. What most panels will do is they will ask themselves, has this candidate thought about the what if question? What if things go wrong? What if things don't go as planned? So that's where you need to include your contingency plan. Evidence of suitability of proposed supervision may not be applicable for a 1+3, right? So how can I get the support in my SeNSS application? Well, higher, you will have to work with the supervisor for your application. So although the supervisor will take over after you finish your master's, you will need to work with that supervisor to submit the application. And what they will do is they will basically allow you to do your master's, develop your training, and then they know that once you finish your master's, you will automatically move on to the PhD phase. So even for 1+3 students, is really, really crucial and important to secure the supervisor support and the supervisor statement. There is a question around how much detail we should include in the methodology. Well, it's very difficult to tell you how much detail is required on a methodological section, because that differs from a project to project. So for example, if I was thinking of a psychology project, which has 3 studies, I would need to see, a solid methodological approach on each of those 3 studies. If I'm looking at a project which is a social anthropology project that does ethnography, I would need to see enough evidence there to convince me that the student has developed, an interview schedule and a strategic approach to the ethnographic method they're going to be using. So the method section and the methodology section is a crucial section, but my advice is don't overdo it in the expense of the innovative and impact sections. So don't overdo the methodology section for a project that is really, really innovative and a project that has significant impact. You need to allow enough balance there, and the supervisor will be, again, the most appropriate person to guide you through that process and tell you how long a methodology section should be. Catering for disability. There is one issue. So when it comes to projects that are submitted by disabled students, first of all, ESRC has the same disability support allowance. So if, for example, a student needs to have additional equipment as part of their PhD, and that is to support their disability, that is something that we get funding from the ESRC. We've got, if there is additional time that is needed there, that's something that you need to incorporate into your proposal. Equally, the part-time. We have had, over the last few years, a significant number of students with disabilities, various types of disabilities, working as part of the SeNSS community. The student forum has a specific student that is looking after students with disabilities, ensuring that we get their views and everything like that. If there is something that needs to be discussed in a confidential manner, feel free to email me, and then we can have a more confidential discussion about how we can support you in submitting a proposal and securing funding and everything like that. We're here as the SeNSS core team. We're here to support you and help you with your application process, We're here to support you and help you secure funding. And obviously, we're here to support and help the most innovative projects, those projects that will change lives, those projects that will change our understanding of the discipline. And we will be more than happy to engage in any conversation, additional conversation with any of you. If anybody feels that I haven't addressed their question, please shout out now. If there are no more questions, as I said, I'm more than happy to answer questions via emails. Please, in terms of managing expectations, I get a lot of emails on a daily basis, so I try to respond within 48 hours to any email that comes my way. If it takes more than that, please be patient. I'm doing my best in responding to everyone. And occasionally my response might be that this is something that you need to be discussing with your home institution, because that's something that is not part of the SeNSS application process. If there are no more questions, I just want to thank you all for your participation and your very interesting questions this afternoon. I will post the presentation, the slides, and the video on the website. And we've got, as I said, a questions and answer session in a few weeks' time that you can come back and spend that time answering questions only. There is one more here. Someone says, I have mainly discussed impact of the research in the proposed impact section, in background section, mainly discussed the literature. Yes, this is the correct approach. You know, proposed impact is where you should be discussing impact of the research, both in academic terms as well as in practice terms. So this is where you need to be putting that information. The background is literature and external knowledge, and sometimes, you know, motivation, the so what question around the particular research. Anything further, I'm happy to stay behind and answer any other questions. For those of you that you might have a need to ask a few more questions. Otherwise, just want to thank you, and that's the end of our webinar for today. Thank you very much.